Guys, this is Dr. Mo, and we are going to actually move some bitmaps around in our game screen today, which is pretty darn cool. This is just a modified chunk of code that I got on the Allegro wiki, so take a look at that if you want to see the original one. It's got a little bit more stuff in it, but it functions the same way. If you run it, it will look like this. So as you can see, what's happening here is we've got a square bitmap, and he's just kind of bouncing around the screen, which is pretty cool. You can see that you're probably going to be recycling a lot of this code for things like Pong and Breakout. So let's get started and go through it. So the assignment here, I'm going to actually give you this code to copy-paste into your Visual Studio. But the actual assignment I want from you is I want you to add a second bouncer, a second square bouncing around that you can see. So I'm going to not only explain this code, but also show you how I'm going to add that second bouncer as I go. The first thing I want to point out here is that we've got a constant added here. It's going to be our frames per second, and you can mess with this later on. It'll do some fun things with lag or speeding up. The deal about constants is that you're not supposed to change them anywhere except right here where they are declared and initialized in the same place. So if I try to do something like this, FPS, frames per second, plus plus, I'm trying to add it to it, notice that Visual Studio gets mad at me because it says it must be modifiable, and constants are not. You're only supposed to change them up at the very top. They are declared with the word const in front of it. If you remember, a float is just like a double, does the same thing. And then FPS is frames per second. You could have named that anything you want. But the idea, when you become a better coder, I'm not great at teaching this, but you really shouldn't have numbers just floating around in your code. And I'll explain what this is later, but you can see 480, what is that? But if you instead had a constant called screen width up here and put that down there, you would know exactly what that number stands for. So it's considered good coding practice to use as many constants as you can. I just didn't throw it in there for this lesson because I didn't want to throw too many new things at you. Alright, so we've got a bunch of empty Allegro variables here. There is a new one. You've got the event queue and the timer. I think are both new for you guys. The event queue is just kind of like a bucket that's going to hold all of the things that happen in your game. The timer is exactly what it sounds like. It's a clock for your game. Here we have the bouncer. We're calling it bouncer, but it's that pink square. We have its X and Y starting position, and we also have its X and Y velocity. So this is how fast it's moving in the X direction, left and right. This is how fast it's moving in the right direction. I'm sorry, the up and down direction. So here's the trick for adding a second bouncer. Pretty much anywhere you see the word bouncer, copy the line of code, paste it, and just add a 2. Okay, right here, I'm going to copy these guys, I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to add a 2. So now we've got bouncer 2, it's got an X and Y position. Let's give it a speed. Okay, so we've got bouncer 2, there we go. Okay. Redraw, we don't need another of those. Alright, here we are, we're initializing Allegro, we're setting up some of these variables. You guys have seen this one, we're using this function to set up the display. You've seen this one. And then timer is very similar. Okay, you can mess with that, as I mentioned, to do more or less lag. Okay, this is the only place where you can't just kind of thoughtlessly, brainlessly copy-paste. So right here, these two lines go together. Normally, AL clear to color wipes your screen. But if you put an AL set target in front of it, it's going to actually change the color of this thing, not the screen. So you need to copy-paste these two lines together and then change the first one here to bouncer 2. So here you're pointing to the bouncer and setting its color to be pink. Here we're pointing to the second bouncer, and let's change its color to be, I don't know, what is this going to be? Something greenish, I think. Or bluish. Okay, great. Here we are, we're actually creating the event queue. And just like when you have to set up all the different helper libraries, with the event queue, you have to tell it what it's going to be looking out for. So with this, it's going to be looking out for have I pressed the little square on the display, and has the clock ticked. That's all you have to care about. Later on, when we have keyboard input or mouse input or controller input or whatever other things that might be going in the event queue, you're going to have those things here as well. Okay, wipe the screen. Notice this doesn't have a set target before it, so it's just going to do the screen. Flip the display and start the timer. So you're going to see a lot of these, we're adding a lot new code here, but you're going to see it in pretty much every game that you write from here on out. There's the start of our game loop. Okay, we are waiting for events to happen. Now this section right here, the timer section, you can basically start thinking of this kind of as like the physics section or the motion section. Okay, the timer section is where the math happens, where you figure out what's going on. And what you're doing in this timer section is you are checking if the bouncer has hit the left wall, or you're checking if the bouncer has hit the right wall. And if it has, you're going to flip the X direction, the X velocity. Okay, that's what gets it to bounce off of those walls. Then you're going to do the same thing with the Y. If it hits the top of the screen, or, you know, the symbol here is or, the bottom of the screen, it's going to bounce, it's going to flip directions. And then what we're going to do is whatever those X, whatever that X velocity is and that Y velocity is, we're going to add it to the position of the bouncer. Okay? So, so sorry about that. I hate that thing. Now, when you do your copy pasting here, please don't make another timer section. You should only have one timer section in the game that you make. Instead, what you can do is you can copy paste the guts of it, like this part right here, and set it up for bouncer 2. Okay, so I'm just going to go through bouncer 2, bouncer 2, bouncer 2, bouncer 2, bouncer 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, oops, not bounce 2R, whoops, bouncer 2, and you guessed it, bouncer 2. Okay, so we're moving around that second bouncer we created. You only need one redraw. Here's the input-output section, the I/O, and you've seen this before. The only I/O that we're checking for is have we pressed the close window button. In the next thing you write, this section will be expanded quite a bit, because the more buttons you press, the longer that section is. And then here's our render section. Not a whole lot of new stuff here. All I have to do is I just have to draw that second bouncer. Okay, so bouncer 2, bouncer 2, bouncer 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this, and I don't think it's going to work. Whoa, actually I'm going to make the font huge. How did I do that? Okay, let's run it first. Okay, it has stopped working. Okay, so I fixed my font, and I also went back and fixed another error that I was not expecting. When I was up here, I forgot to create a second bouncer. I had done a good job copy-pasting everything except this line, so make sure that you have that second bouncer to actually being created, because otherwise it'll crash your program like mine did. So now it's not working the way I was expecting it to not work. So if you run it now, you see the second bouncer, but you don't see the first one anymore. Where did the pink one go? Well, the problem is that the pink one is behind the new blue one that I made. So what needs to happen in order to see both of them is you need to either change the second one's starting position or change its X and or Y speed so you can see it. Because otherwise it's just going to, if it starts at the same place and goes in the same direction, it's not going to be able to be seen. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to change its starting position. You can mess with the velocity. It's kind of cool to do that too. There we go. Now you can see both of them. And they both have the same speed and kind of sort of the same trajectory. But because one's not directly behind the other, you can see them both going. All right, in class, I will show you some really fun things to do in terms of messing with color and having them leave little cool tails behind them. But in the meantime, we're just going to kind of leave it as it is for this video, and so we don't make it too complicated. All right, good luck with this project, and have fun.